I've done a few stories on bands who were banned from cities after inciting a riot or when their fans misbehaved, but this is a unique story. This story involves the band Def Leppard and how one of their members made some disparaging remarks about a particular city's population, resulting in rock radio stations not only pulling their music but destroying it as well. It also resulted in the then mayor of the city calling for a lifetime ban on the group from ever performing there again. Let's explore what happened in today's video. In January of 1983, British rockers Def Leppard had released their third studio album, Pyromania. The album was a massive seller, moving over 10 million copies in the States. And by September of '83, the band was touring America, playing a show in El Paso, Texas. It was during the show that several members of the audience, who frontman Joe Elliott identified as being Mexican, threw objects on stage. The next night, on September 7, 1983, during a performance in Tucson, Arizona, during the 8th song of the set, Rock of Ages, there's a part in the live performance where there's a fan sing-along. It was normal of the band's frontman Joe Elliott to reference the group's previous live show to get the audience's energy up. According to the Arizona Star, he reportedly referred to the band's previous show in El Paso as, and I quote, "that place with all the Mexicans, and they made a lot more noise than that." They're using a derogatory term for Mexicans. Elliott didn't think much of the comments and thought he wouldn't ruffle any feathers, as he thought his humor was in the same vein as comedians Cheech and Chong. Also unknown to the frontman was that in the audience that night in Tucson was a reporter from the Arizona Daily Star who passed on his comment to DJs and reporters back in El Paso. Keep in mind, El Paso's population at the time was about 65% Mexican American. Up until this point, El Paso had been the site of several Def Leppard concerts, starting in 1980 and then again in 1981. A few days after the incident, a recording of the slur being used would surface, and it was at this point all the rock stations in El Paso stopped playing the band's music. The controversy also drew the ire of El Paso's then mayor, Jonathan Rogers, who proposed a permanent boycott of the band from ever being allowed back into the city. Even Aaron Michaels, who was the program director of the local radio station KLAQ in El Paso, was photographed ripping the album sleeve of Pyromania. Hispanic groups in the city, meanwhile, demanded an apology from the band. Def Leppard, by this point in time, was now in Japan doing press and promotion, and it would take about 3 weeks for word of what was going on in El Paso to reach the band. Nearly 3 weeks after the incident took place, on September 30th, Joe Elliott, who was in Japan, would call into the local radio station KLAQ and give a brief 10-minute interview apologizing for his remarks. According to the book Nothing But a Good Time, Elliott would remark, "that comment, I swear, was aimed at 5 Hispanic kids who were spitting at us, throwing Jack Daniels and kung fu stars at the band, not at anybody else in El Paso. I was slagging off those 5 bastards. I'm a Cheech and Chong fan, and they use that term all the time," he'd claim. To make amends, Elliott offered to fly 2 fans from El Paso to see the band in Europe. The offer, though, wouldn't be taken up by anyone and instead offended some Hispanic groups. The El Paso Herald-Post would interview the district director of the League of United Latin American Citizens, who was offended by the offer, telling the paper, "he's trying to buy off El Paso and we won't have that." Since no one from the city traveled to Europe to see the band, the group instead donated $10,000 to a Hispanic charity in Los Angeles. The issue would haunt the band for the next 2 months, and finally on November 23rd, Elliott would host a press conference in California to address the comments stating in the book Nothing But a Good Time, "the last thing that Mexican Americans need as they try to rid themselves of the stereotype is for me or anyone else to make such statements. It was stupid of me to make such a false accusation." The ban on the group from performing in El Paso would only last until the end of the year, and Def Leppard was once again scheduled to play El Paso 5 years later in 1988 as part of the Hysteria tour. But there were still a lot of hurt feelings. Local radio stations in El Paso polled their audience about how they felt, with 60% of the audience at KPRR still upset about the comments, but rival station KLAQ had 85% of their listeners being in favor of the group returning to the city. Ahead of the band's show in El Paso in 1988, the group's manager claimed that the band would hold a press conference to clear the air on their 5-year-old comments. But the show would eventually be scrapped. Bobby Welch, the director of special events at the university and the promoter of the El Paso concert, would tell UPI.com that several reasons led to the cancellation, including death threats, possible protesting of the show, and a possible disruption during the show. Def Leppard would play their first shows in Mexico in 1993 without incident, and they would finally return to play El Paso in the year 2000 on the Euphoria tour. That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like button and subscribe. We'll see you again on Rock and Roll True Stories.